Sometimes, the cruelest rooms are the ones filled with the richest smiles. The chandelier light shimmered across crystal glasses and polished marble floors, casting a golden glow over a ballroom that smelled faintly of champagne and expensive perfume. The kind of place where every detail whispered wealth, where every guest moved with quiet confidence, as if they belonged to something untouchable, something exclusive. And then there was Emily Hayes, standing just inside the entrance like a misplaced shadow, her fingers lightly gripping the strap of her small bag as her eyes adjusted to the brightness, her breath catching for half a second as she took it all in, the laughter, the music, the low hum of conversations that seemed to glide past her as if she were invisible. And maybe she was, because no one greeted her, no one acknowledged her, only a few glances that lingered just long enough to judge, to question, to silently ask what she was doing here. And she felt it immediately. That familiar weight pressing against her chest, the awareness that she did not belong, not in this room, not among people who wore confidence as effortlessly as their tailored suits and glittering dresses. And yet she stepped forward anyway, because she had to, because this wasn't just another night. This was a shift she couldn't afford to lose, a chance she couldn't afford to waste, even if it meant walking into a room that would never see her as anything more than background noise. Her dress, brushing softly against her legs as she moved, the fabric simple, hand-stitched in places if you looked closely enough, a quiet testament to nights spent under dim light, fixing what she couldn't replace, reshaping something old into something that could pass, at least from a distance. But distance didn't last long here, not when eyes were trained to notice imperfection like a reflex, and it started with a whisper, barely audible, just a soft murmur behind a raised glass. "Is that thrifted?" Followed by a faint laugh that spread like ripples across still water, subtle, controlled, but unmistakably sharp. And Emily pretended not to hear it. The way you learn to do when you've heard it your whole life. The way you teach yourself to keep walking, to keep your head steady even when your heartbeat starts to climb, even when your palms feel just a little too warm. She adjusted the edge of her sleeve, smoothing it down as if that alone could silence the room. As if confidence could be stitched into fabric the same way thread held everything together. And for a moment, just a moment, she believed she might make it through the night unnoticed, just another worker blending into the background, until the laughter grew a little louder, a little closer, and someone stepped just enough into her path to make sure she couldn't ignore it anymore. And across the room, leaning casually near a column as if he had all the time in the world, Daniel Crawford watched it all unfold. His expression unreadable, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, taking in every detail, every glance, every whisper, and most of all, the way she held herself together in a room determined to pull her apart. Emily tried to keep moving, tried to convince herself that if she just focused on her job, on the tray she was supposed to pick up, on the instructions she had memorized before stepping into this room, the noise would fade into the background. But it did not. It followed her like a shadow, growing louder, sharper, until it wrapped around her like a quiet storm she could not escape. And when she reached the service table near the center of the ballroom, a woman in a shimmering silver gown tilted, her head slightly, her lips curving into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sweet but edged with something colder. "Are you part of the staff or a guest?" The pause lingered just long enough to draw attention, and a few nearby guests turned, their conversations slowing as curiosity replaced politeness. Emily swallowed, her fingers tightening slightly around the edge of the tray. "I am filling in tonight," she said carefully, her voice steady but quiet, hoping that would be enough, hoping it would end there. But the woman's gaze dropped deliberately to the dress, tracing every seam, every imperfection, as if cataloging it for others to see. "Filling in," she repeated softly. And then, just loud enough for the small circle around them to hear, "That explains the dress." A ripple of laughter followed, controlled, refined, but unmistakably intentional, and someone behind her added, "It is kind of brave, honestly," while another voice chimed in, "Or desperate." And Emily felt the heat rise to her face, not from embarrassment alone, but from the effort it took to remain still, to not react, to not give them the satisfaction they were quietly waiting for. She shifted her weight slightly, adjusting the tray, reminding herself why she was here, rent, groceries, survival, things that mattered more than pride. But pride had a way of slipping through the cracks anyway. And then the silver gown woman stepped closer, her tone turning almost playful. "Why do not you turn around for us?" she said, gesturing lightly with her glass. "Let us see the full design." The request hung in the air like a test, and for a second, Emily thought she might refuse, thought she might simply walk away, but the eyes around her held her in place, watching, waiting, measuring, and slowly, almost mechanically, she turned, not because she wanted to, but because sometimes the easiest way out of a moment was straight through it, the fabric of her dress. Catching the light as she moved, revealing the careful stitching along the back, the subtle adjustments she had made to make it fit just right. And for a brief second, there was silence, not admiration, not yet, just a pause before the judgment returned. "You can tell it is handmade," someone whispered. "Not in a good way," another added, and the laughter returned, softer this time but deeper, more assured, and across the room. Daniel's gaze narrowed slightly, not in anger, not yet, but in recognition, because he had seen this before. The way people revealed who they really were when they believed no one important was watching. And he remained where he was, still, composed, his hands resting loosely at his sides, as if he were simply another observer in a room full of them. But his attention never left her, not even for a second, because there was something in the way she stood there, in the way she held herself together despite everything pressing against her, something that did not belong to this room, something real, and he knew, without saying a word, that the moment unfolding in front of him was not finished yet. The laughter did not stop immediately, but it changed, shifting into something quieter, more controlled, like people trying to maintain elegance while still holding on to their amusement, and Emily felt it settle into the air around her, heavy and inescapable, her hands lowering slowly from the tray as she realized no one was actually waiting for service anymore. They were waiting for her reaction, for something to confirm what they had already decided about her. And for a moment, just a moment, she almost gave it to them, almost let her shoulders drop, almost let her eyes fall to the floor the way they used to when she was younger, when moments like this felt like the end of everything. But something stopped her, something small but steady. The memory of late nights bent over fabric, the quiet hum of a sewing machine that barely worked, the careful way she had traced each line of this dress with her own hands, not because anyone would notice, but because she would, because it mattered to her. And slowly, she straightened, not dramatically, not enough to draw attention, just enough to hold herself together. And that was when the woman in silver reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the dress near Emily's side. Not rough, not aggressive, just deliberate, the kind of touch that pretended curiosity while carrying judgment underneath. "What is this material?" she asked, lifting the fabric slightly between her fingers, examining it as if it were something questionable, something beneath her, and Emily felt the shift instantly, that line between observation and intrusion, her breath catching just enough to betray how close she was to breaking. But she did not pull away, she did not step back, she simply answered, her voice quieter now, but still steady. "It is repurposed fabric," she said, and the word itself seemed to spark another round of murmurs, someone repeating it under their breath as if it were amusing, repurposed, followed by a soft chuckle, and then another voice, "So it is recycled." And more laughter followed, not loud, not chaotic, but precise, targeted, the kind that lands exactly where it is meant to, and Emily could feel it pressing in from all sides, closing the space around her until it felt smaller, tighter, harder to breathe. And across the room, Daniel exhaled slowly, his gaze fixed not on the crowd but on her, on the way she answered without apology, on the way she did not retreat even when every signal in the room told her she should. And something in that moment shifted for him, something that moved past simple observation into something sharper, more deliberate, because this was no longer just a room revealing itself. It was a choice unfolding, a line being drawn between those who measured value by appearance and those who understood something deeper, and he could see it clearly now, the contrast written into every detail of the scene, the polished marble beneath their feet, the designer gowns that cost more than most people made in a month, the effortless confidence that came from never having to prove anything, and then her, standing there in a dress she had built piece by piece, holding on to dignity in a space designed to strip it away. And when the woman in silver let go of the fabric with a faint smile, as if she had confirmed something to herself, Emily felt the absence of that touch like a quiet release, but the tension did not disappear. It lingered, stretching across the room, waiting for what would come next, and for the first time since she had stepped inside, Daniel shifted his weight forward, just slightly, not enough for anyone to notice yet, but enough to signal that the moment everyone thought belonged to them was about to change. The shift was subtle at first, almost invisible beneath the surface of polite conversation, but it was there, like the quiet moment before a storm changes direction, and Emily felt it without understanding why, a slight break in the rhythm of the room, a pause that did not belong to the people who had been laughing just seconds before, and then she heard footsteps, steady, unhurried, cutting through the polished air with a confidence that did not need to announce itself, and before anyone could react, before another comment could land, a voice spoke, calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. "You are all looking at it the wrong way." And the words did not rise above the room. They did not need to, because something in the tone made everything else fall quiet, and Emily turned slightly, her eyes catching the figure stepping into the circle, Daniel Crawford, though she did not know his name yet, only the presence he carried. The way the space seemed to open for him without effort, and he did not look at the others first. He looked at her, not quickly, not in passing, but fully, as if she were the only person in the room worth seeing, and that alone was enough to unsettle the balance that had formed around her. The woman in silver straightened just slightly, her smile tightening as she tried to recalibrate. "I am sorry," she said, her tone polite but edged with irritation, and Daniel's gaze shifted to her only briefly before returning to Emily, as if the answer did not belong to the one who asked the question. "You see, address that. Does not belong here," he continued, his voice steady, measured, each word placed with intention. "But what I see is someone who made something out of nothing, and had the courage to wear it into a room that was never built for her." And the silence that followed was no longer comfortable. It stretched across the polished floor, pressing into every corner, forcing people to listen in a way they had not planned to. And Emily felt her breath catch again, but this time it was different, not from pressure, but from something she had not expected, something unfamiliar, recognition, not of who she was to the world, but of what she had done. And Daniel took one small step closer, just enough to stand beside her rather than across from her, shifting the dynamic without needing to say it out loud. "You call it repurposed," he added, his eyes flicking briefly to the fabric before returning to her face. "I call it intention." And someone in the crowd shifted, another lowered their glass. Slightly, the confidence that had filled the space beginning to crack under the weight of a perspective they had not considered, and the woman in silver let out a soft, controlled laugh, attempting to recover. "That is a very poetic way to describe it," she said, her tone light but forced, and Daniel finally looked at her fully, his expression calm, almost neutral, but there was something in his eyes now that had not been there before, something sharper, something that made it clear the moment had moved beyond her control. "No," he said simply. "It is an honest one." And the room did not laugh this time. No one echoed her tone. No one reinforced her position, because something had already shifted, something irreversible, and Emily stood there, still holding herself together, but no longer alone in it, the weight that had pressed against her beginning to lift, not because the room had changed, but because for the first time since she had stepped inside, someone had seen her exactly as she was, and chose to say it out loud. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, like a room learning how to breathe again under a new kind of pressure, and Emily could feel it in the way people looked at her now, not openly, not with admiration, not yet, but with hesitation, with uncertainty, as if something they had already decided was no longer as clear as it had been moments ago. And Daniel remained beside her, not moving away, not stepping back into the anonymity he had held before, his presence steady, deliberate, as if he had chosen this exact position and had no intention of giving it up. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, because the room itself was still catching up, still adjusting to the shift that had just taken place, until a voice from the edge of the circle broke through, cautious but curious. "And you are?" The question hung in the air, directed at Daniel but carried by everyone in the room. because suddenly, who he was mattered more than anything he had said, and Emily felt it too. That subtle turn, the way attention redirected itself, searching for status, for confirmation, for something that could either validate or dismiss what had just happened, and Daniel glanced toward the speaker briefly before answering, his tone calm, almost casual. "Someone who appreciates craftsmanship," he said, and it was not an answer that satisfied them, not fully, not in the way they wanted, because it did not place him in a category they could easily measure, and the woman in silver shifted. Again, her smile returning, thinner now, more calculated. "Well, I am sure we all appreciate effort," she replied, emphasizing the last word just enough to draw a faint reaction from a few nearby guests, trying to reclaim the tone she had lost, trying to bring the moment back under her control, and for a second, it almost worked, the tension flickering, the old rhythm attempting to return, but Daniel did not let it. He did not raise his voice, he did not change his posture, he simply spoke. Again, softer this time, but somehow more final. "There is a difference between effort and intention," he said, his gaze steady. "Effort tries to impress. Intention tells the truth." And the words settled differently, not as a challenge, not as a performance, but as something harder to dismiss, and Emily felt it resonate in a way she could not fully explain, as if he had reached into the part of her that had kept going when no one was watching, when no one cared, when it would have been easier to stop trying altogether. And for the first time since she had stepped into the ballroom, she allowed herself to look at him fully, not just as the man who had interrupted the moment, but as someone who understood it. And he met her gaze without hesitation, without curiosity, without judgment, just recognition, as if he had already seen everything he needed to see. And across the room, a man in a dark suit approached quickly, his steps more urgent than anyone else's had been that night, his expression shifting the moment he reached Daniel. "Sir, they are ready for you," he said quietly, but not quietly enough, because the word alone carried weight, and it moved through the room faster than any whisper had before, and Emily felt it immediately, the subtle intake of breath around her, the way posture changed, the way attention sharpened, because suddenly, the man standing beside her was no longer undefined, no longer just an observer. And the room that had been so certain of itself just minutes ago now waited, watching, as if the next word spoken would decide everything. The word lingered in the air longer than it should have, simple, quiet, but heavy enough to shift the entire atmosphere. "Sir." And it moved through the crowd like a silent signal, straightening backs, softening expressions, recalibrating attitudes in real time. And Emily felt it before she understood it. The way the space around Daniel changed. The way people who had not noticed him before suddenly could not look away. And the man who had approached him stood with a kind of respectful urgency that did not belong to ordinary interactions. "They are waiting on stage," he added, slightly lower this time. But it did not matter. The message had already landed, and Daniel did not respond immediately. He let the moment sit, his gaze still resting on Emily, as if everything else could wait, as if the entire room, the event, the expectations placed on him, all of it could pause for just a second longer. And then, finally, he gave a small nod, subtle, controlled, the kind of gesture that confirmed authority without needing to display it. And that was when it happened, the realization, not announced, not declared, but understood all at once, passing from one person to another without a single word being spoken, and the woman in silver felt it, too, her expression tightening just slightly as she took a half step back, her earlier confidence dissolving into something more cautious, more calculated, because suddenly the man she had tried to dismiss was not someone she could categorize, not someone she could overlook, and Emily stood still, caught between the version of the room she had walked into and the one that now surrounded her, her heartbeat steady but louder than before, her thoughts trying to catch up with what was unfolding. And Daniel finally shifted his attention, just enough to acknowledge the room as a whole, his presence expanding outward in a way that made it clear he had always belonged here, even when he chose not to show it. And then he spoke, not to the crowd, not to the woman who had started it all, but to Emily, his voice softer now, more personal. "You did not come here to be invisible," he said, and the words landed differently than anything else that had been said that night, because they were not about defending her, not about correcting the room, but about reminding her of something she might have forgotten, and Emily felt it, that quiet shift inside her, the part of her that had shrunk just enough to survive moments like this beginning to expand again. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough, and she met his gaze without hesitation this time, her voice steady when she answered, "No, I did not." And there was no apology in it, no uncertainty, just truth, and Daniel gave a faint smile, not wide, not performative, just enough to acknowledge what had just passed between them. And then he turned, finally stepping away, his movement drawing attention like a current through water, the crowd parting slightly without being asked, without needing direction, because now they understood, and as he walked toward the stage, the murmurs began again. But they were different now, no longer amused, no longer dismissive, but uncertain, questioning, recalculating, and Emily stood where she was, the same dress, the same place, the same person, and yet nothing about the moment felt the same anymore. Because for the first time that night, the room was no longer deciding who she was, and somewhere ahead, under the glow of the stage lights, the man who had just changed everything was about to tell them exactly why. The room followed him without meaning to, not physically, but with attention, with silence, with a kind of quiet surrender that replaced the earlier laughter, and Emily felt it shift around her as Daniel stepped onto the stage, the lights catching the edges of his silhouette, defining him in a way that left no doubt, no ambiguity, no room for misunderstanding, and for a brief second, the host moved toward him with a practiced smile, ready to introduce him, but Daniel lifted a hand slightly, not dismissive, just enough to signal that he did not need the introduction, and that alone told the room everything it needed to know, because people who required no introduction were the ones who held the most power, and when he stepped fully into the light, turning to face the audience, the murmur that followed was no longer confusion, it was recognition, quiet but undeniable, and Emily heard it in fragments around her. Whispers that carried his name with a mixture of surprise and sudden respect. Crawford, that is Daniel Crawford. And the realization landed in her chest like a slow, steady weight, not overwhelming, but grounding, connecting the man who had stood beside her to something far larger than the moment they had shared. And Daniel did not rush. He did not fill the silence immediately. He let it settle, let the room come to him instead of chasing it. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried easily, not loud, but clear enough to reach every corner without strain. "Tonight is supposed to be about vision," he said, his gaze moving across the crowd, not searching, not judging, simply observing, about recognizing what has value before everyone else sees it. And a few people nodded instinctively, relieved to hear something familiar, something that fit the event they thought they were attending, but Daniel did not stop there. He paused just long enough to shift direction, but sometimes, he continued, his tone changing just slightly. "We fail that test in the simplest ways." And the words hung differently now, heavier, more deliberate, and Emily felt her breath slow as she listened, her attention locked onto him without effort, and Daniel's gaze moved again, this time not across the entire room, but toward a specific place within it, toward her, and even from where she stood, she could feel it, that quiet alignment, that invisible line connecting the stage to the space she occupied. "We walk into a room like this," he said, "and we think we know what matters, what belongs, what is worthy of attention." And there was no accusation in his voice, no anger, just clarity, the kind that made it harder to ignore. But value is not always dressed the way we expect it to be, and the silence deepened again, not uncomfortable, but focused, as if the room itself was being asked to listen more carefully than it had before, and Daniel took a small breath before finishing the thought. "Sometimes it stands quietly in the corner, wearing something no one bothered to understand." And the words settled over the audience like a mirror, reflecting something back at them they had not planned to see. And Emily felt it, not as pressure this time, but as something steadier, something that anchored her in place, because for the first time, the story of the night was no longer being written around her, it was being spoken directly into the room, and no one was laughing anymore. No one moved, not at first, as if the entire room had forgotten how to respond when the usual rules no longer applied. And Daniel let the silence do its work, let it settle into the polished floors and the perfectly arranged tables, into the expressions of people who had spent years mastering control only to find themselves unsure of what came next. And then he continued, his voice steady, grounded. "We talk about innovation like it is something rare," he said, "like it only exists in boardrooms or behind glass walls. But the truth is, it shows up in the smallest places, in the quietest efforts, in the hands of people who do not have the luxury of failure." And a few eyes shifted, a few shoulders straightened. But no one interrupted, no one dared to redirect the moment, because it no longer belonged to them. And Emily stood where she was, her fingers no longer gripping the fabric of her dress, her posture no longer guarded, but still processing, still catching up to the way the room had changed around her. And Daniel's gaze found her again, not dramatically, not in a way that drew attention, but enough for her to feel it, to understand that what he was saying was not abstract, not theoretical. It was specific, intentional. And then he took a small step forward on the stage, just enough to shift the energy again. "There is someone in this room tonight," he said, "who created something with nothing more than skill, patience, and belief in their own vision." And the words moved through the crowd like a quiet current, heads turning slightly, eyes searching, not mocking now, not dismissing, but looking, really looking. And Emily felt it all at once, the attention redirecting, not as pressure, but as something else entirely, something unfamiliar, recognition. And her instinct was to step back, to disappear into the space she had occupied before. But she did not. She stayed where she was, because something in her had shifted too, something that no longer allowed her to shrink in the same way. And Daniel's voice softened just slightly, not losing its strength, but gaining something more personal. "And earlier tonight," he continued, "that person was reduced to a joke." And the words landed gently but firmly, not accusatory, not harsh, but impossible to ignore. And a few people lowered their eyes, a few shifted uncomfortably, because now the moment had a name, now it had a shape, and there was no pretending it had not happened. And Daniel did not linger there. He did not press the discomfort further. Instead, he moved forward, offering something different, something that changed the direction entirely. "But here is what I believe," he said, his gaze steady. "Value does not need permission to exist, and talent does not need approval to matter." And Emily felt her breath catch again, not from tension, but from something deeper, something that settled into her chest like a quiet truth she had always known, but had never heard spoken out loud. And Daniel gave a small pause before finishing. "Sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to see it." And this time, the silence that followed was not uncertain. It was full, complete, as if the room itself had finally understood something it had been missing all along. For a few seconds, no one spoke, not because they did not know what to say, but because there was nothing left to hide behind. No polite laughter, no casual dismissal, no easy way to undo what had already been revealed. And Emily stood in the center of it all, not elevated, not spotlighted, but no longer invisible. Her presence now defined not by what others had assumed, but by what had been seen. And she felt it in the way the room looked at her, not all at once, not perfectly, but differently, enough to matter. And on the stage, Daniel let his final words settle before stepping back slightly, not retreating, just creating space, as if the moment no longer belonged to him alone. And then something unexpected happened. A single pair of hands came together in a quiet clap, hesitant at first, uncertain, and then another followed, and another, until the sound spread across the room, not loud, not overwhelming, but steady, genuine. And Emily felt it rise around her, not as praise, not as attention she had ever asked for, but as acknowledgement. And her instinct was still to step away, to let it pass. But she did not. She stayed, her shoulders relaxed now, her breath even, her eyes lifting just slightly as she allowed herself to exist fully in the space she had once tried to shrink within. And across the room, the woman in silver lowered her gaze, her earlier confidence gone, replaced with something quieter, something closer to reflection than pride. And Daniel watched it all. From the stage, not with satisfaction, not with triumph, but with a calm understanding, as if this had never been about proving a point, but about revealing one. And after a moment, he stepped down, moving through the crowd with the same quiet authority he had carried from the beginning. the applause fading naturally as conversations slowly began again, softer now, more measured, and when he reached Emily, he did not rush to speak. He simply stopped in front of her, giving her the same space he had given the room, and for a second, they stood there, the noise of the ballroom dimmed by something more personal, more grounded, and then he smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just enough to carry warmth. "You held your ground," he said, his voice low but clear, and Emily let out a small breath she did not realize she had been holding, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her dress, no longer adjusting it, just feeling it. "I almost did not," she admitted, her voice honest, steady. And Daniel nodded slightly, as if that was the only answer that made sense. "But you did," he replied, and there was no exaggeration in it. No need to elevate the moment beyond what it already was. And after a brief pause, he reached into his jacket, not hurried, not theatrical, and pulled out a simple card, extending it toward her. "I would like to see what you can create when you are not being judged," he said, and Emily looked at it, then back at him. The weight of the moment settling in quietly, not as a sudden transformation, not as a promise of something unrealistic, but as an opening, a possibility she had not expected when she walked into the room. And she took the card, her fingers steady, her gaze clear, and for the first time that night, she smiled, not to fit in, not to reassure anyone, but because something real had finally found its place. And as the music resumed and the room slowly returned to motion, the story that had begun with quiet laughter ended with something far more lasting. Not a dress, not a moment, but a shift in how one person chose to see and how one person chose to be seen.